Okay, before we get started today, Trevor ran into an error that he reports says something along the lines of cannot what to R? Cannot resolve R. Remember from last week's lecture that R is the compiled version of your resources, and your resources could be, all right, let's just take a look. Here's the app, and here's your resources folder. Inside that resources folder, there are layouts, there are images, there are menus, there are values, which includes the strings that we looked at last time. All of this has to get turned into ones and zeros at some point. And all of this gets, when you hit the run button and you build this, basically compile it. When you build it, takes all of these and turns them into a bunch of ones and zeros as part of a class named R. And we used that to get access to, here's where we used it. We used it to get access to our text view on the form. We will use it in the future to get access to the form itself, to any object on the view in the activity. So if it can't find it, it's an interesting question.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. Because now I can't get to any of the objects on my form. Now, why it's happening to him, your research says just rebuild. Usually there's a project or code or build. Is there a clean here in this one?
That's what they told me to do. Clean project and rebuild it. That's what
Okay.
I did, and it didn't
And you
resolve
found the
it.
project that said, where's clean? I don't even see it. Refactor wouldn't do it.
It's in build.
Is it in build? Did I miss it? Oh, there it is. Okay. So you do, this was the last time we did Android development a couple of years ago. We were cleaning a lot. It's causing all kinds of issues. A rebuild, a clean. Now you're doing this on your laptop, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what I was doing is looking through my journal, which is on my website. I've shared my journal with you. These are just when I find stupid stuff that I'm never going to remember. It causes all kinds of trouble. I put it in my journal. I've since found out that I should just put everything in my journal because I forget everything after about 2 years. But it's not all in there. Good thing I still have my recordings from last year. But one thing I discovered when I was looking at this is when you define class level variables. Remember, the class level variables could be defined here. So I might define a string called username. Perfectly legal. But what you cannot do is initialize it here. Liar. It might initialize, but my guess is it won't run. And I need to get the emulator started anyways. So now we'll see when we get there. This is just being defined. And so it's very likely that this is going to fail. Now, it could be that, again, these are 2 years old, that since then they've allowed you to initialize things inside the class level. But I think what I'm talking about there is, what if I move text view here up to there? Then R might not be defined. Are you trying to define a class level variable, Trevor, by any chance? That uses R, because R might not be defined yet. How do I know that this is built before this thing gets built? So if you for some reason have this variable with its initialization outside of the method, it might not be able to find R. We'll see what mine does. And so I'm just going to leave the recording running and scroll through here a little bit. Comparing strings using double equals does not seem to work in an inline if, which implies to me that it does work otherwise. We're going to test that today. To install drivers for Nexus, go to the device. To install Galaxy drivers, development tools. The device doesn't show up. I haven't gotten to devices yet. Notice I've got a whole page on what happens if my device doesn't work. And here's a nice little tip. You want to set a color, do a color.parseColor, and then put a hexadecimal color code in there. Okay, so that's the only tip I got for you, Trevor. You might want to start it. I just uploaded my sample file from last time. It's called sample code zip, so if you download that, should work. I did move these projects back and forth between Windows machines and Mac machines, and I didn't seem to have any trouble because everything's text-based. Let's see how my emulator's doing here. Waiting for me to sign in. So, at least in this case, it lied because my journal said that doesn't work. But what happens if I take this outside? And why would I do that? Because I want access to this text view from 3 or 4 different methods, right? Remember from last semester that if you want to share this variable across multiple methods, then make it a class level variable. And then I should probably make it private as make it private as well. I think I read somewhere in either the book or someplace that any variables that you declare outside here are automatically private unless you designate otherwise. I think it's a good idea. So I'm going to run it again, see if I get any errors this time. Those are red. Unfortunately, now the sample code has stopped. Okay, so now the trick is, how do we read this and figure out what the heck went wrong? Fatal except. Usually the error is very near the top. Unable to instantiate activity component. I think the error messages in the past were bad. Way to get one of these things. Unable to invoke virtual method find by ID on a null object reference. So here's my find. I found something that I recognize. Heck, hallelujah. Find view by ID. There's my find view by ID. That failed because this is null. That's a different error message than Trevor was getting. Right. So that's what my journal was talking about. You cannot find any of your form objects at the class level. What you can do is define TV up here, and then down here just initialize it. That should be legal. You just can't initialize it outside here yet because it's in the build process and R probably hasn't been defined yet. Which is very similar to what Trevor was mentioning. That's why it kind of caught my attention. And now I'm back to working again. I found that was a pretty common mistake last time I taught this class. Is that we'd create this and say, okay, I need this TV, I want to use it in multiple methods. So define it and immediately set it to link to the text view on my activity. But at this point, R is not yet defined. When we get down to run, when we get down to main, then okay, or on create, excuse me, when we get down to on create, then okay, now run the code, okay, at that point, all of our building is done and we're running code. And we can refer to R. Questions on that? Okay, quick trip to my website and to OneDrive. I think I just trashed OneDrive in the process here. I created an _ mobile app development folder on my OneDrive account. Everybody been there? If not, find out how today. It's the same OneDrive account I had last semester. But for you new people, if you don't remember how to get there, ask me today before we go. Inside of there, I've created an assignment submittals folder. Inside of there is where you should be dropping your stuff. And send me an email to let me know it's there. I also told you that the due date for the first assignment that I gave you last week is Friday. I discovered when I was teaching the fast forward class that Friday is about the only good day for me to have as due dates because I'm not going to get much graded. I hope Karen's patient because she submitted it, and if I can get to it between now and Friday, I will, but chances are pretty slim. So that's why due dates come in on Fridays, because then they're due Friday, you get them in Friday night, Saturday I wake up all anxious, ready to grade your assignments. And I'll get them graded by Sunday so that you have some feedback, and then you submit them for updates just like you did in the past. So for Aaron and Tyler's benefit, you do get to submit your assignments at least twice. I'll send you an evaluation sheet. I'm guessing that Bob sent you evaluation sheets last year, right? Little check boxes, what you did wrong, half points here, half points there. One of you nod at me, yes? You've seen the evaluation sheets? No? All right. Take a quick look at the evaluation sheets. These are not, we can't go there because they're not current. Just go to programming logic beginning. And you'll get an evaluation sheet that looks like this back from me via email. I'll tell you what's right, what's wrong, what's your score, and what are your update points. If you turn everything in, you fix all the problems, you get your updates points back. If you screw up new stuff, which occasionally happens, you fix one thing, you break another. If you screw up new stuff, and I think it's worth your while and my while, I may offer you a second update point, but it never goes beyond that. Try to get it right the first time. All my in-class stuff, I hope to, everything I record or everything that I do in class, I hope to save it up here. Gotta help me remember to put it up there. And these are the old recordings. The new recordings are now available on the website. They will start popping up. So if you go to Intro to Mobile, we're still in part 1. These YouTube videos are available for you to browse through 1, 2. And I'll add new ones today. So that's where you find all the stuff for the class. Questions? Okay, then I'm going to shift to Blackboard real quick. You should see, tell me if I'm wrong, you should see the assignment in Blackboard and its due date, right? Where did Harold go? I gave him credit for being here and he bugged out. Where did he go? I guess this review wasn't necessary for them. Okay, so your stuff should be over here. I'm also going to be adding an assignment right now. As you might remember, this is a 4-hour class and we're only meeting for 3. Somewhere in your schedule, this should now show up as a 3-hour class on Monday night with 1 hour of online time. So part of my job is to make sure you have something to do online every week. No, not an hour, 3 hours, because for every hour in class, you're supposed to do 2 hours of homework, right? Doesn't always work out that way. This will not be a fixed thing. If I can't dream something up for you to do, I won't. But usually that's not real hard. Most of you who were in my classes in the past remember the tickets, a little mini assignment to do by next time. That's kind of what these are going to be like. So the first one I want to add today is a new ticket for, let's call it string processing. You will get a score, total of 5 points, and the description looks like this. Read the part 2 notes on string functions. We'll probably talk about them a little bit today, but I'm not going to go into them very deeply. I'm just going to fly right over the top of them and tell you these functions exist. Select 4 functions. Create and test some sample code that demonstrates those functions. So what I want you, let's just fly over back to there again here real quick. Okay, here's my part 2 built-in classes. Strings are part of the built-in classes. Here's a whole bunch of string functions that are built into the language. I want you to pick 4 of those and come up with some sample code to demonstrate how they work. Okay. So here's one here, but that doesn't demonstrate how it works. It just gives you a quick example. I want you to actually write a little bit of code like we've been doing that tests these and proves that they work. You can post screen snapshots. You're going to post stuff on Blackboard for this in a second here. But pick some of these and figure out how they work. Google them, find some examples. Done yet? Bless you.
I hope so.
Okay. So here's some other examples. Don't use mine. Okay. Not fair. I put a few in here. Your job is to find some other examples or demonstrate it, write some code, test it, make it work. 4 of those. There's a whole pile of them to choose from. Pick 4. You want to be a wimp, do the easy ones. My advice is kind of read over them and find out which ones you think might be valuable in future programs and make sure you understand how to use them. But any 4. Second part of that assignment, so that's worth 1 point each. One point for each demonstrated function. Then one more point. What I want you to do is read over at least one other person's submittal and make a comment or ask an intelligent question. So how are we going to post these? What I'm going to do next is create a wiki. And hopefully I'll be able to link it in here before I'm done. When is this due? Friday. That's when our program is due. Stop whining. Friday. Okay, now let's see if I can figure out how to add some new stuff to this. I'm going to have to do that later. I didn't get around packages, customization, user groups, grade center, course tools. I'm going to create a wiki called string processing. It's already available. You can open it, you can edit it, you can comment it, and I'm not going to grade the wiki directly. Do it indirectly. I will be looking at the wiki as well, making sure you submit it. If you did, I go give you your points. Okay, so here's the string processing wiki. How do you put stuff in there? You click on it. No, that's not right. I don't want to create a wiki page, or do I? That's probably me. So what does it look like in student mode? Okay, I'll sort the rest of that out. Somebody go out there and see if you can see the wiki. What I also hope to do is put a link in here to that wiki. Right now, my link button doesn't work. Okay, I will finish that up. Pretty clear enough on what I want you to do? Give me sample code. I don't want you to, if you feel like it's really complicated and you want to describe it, feel free. Do not just copy and paste code from a website. You should actually type it into the Android Studio, test it, prove it. If you want to then highlight, copy, paste from your Android Studio code into the wiki, that would be appropriate. But I haven't been teaching for 5 weeks, so I forgot how to do wikis, so I'll figure that out and get it in here soon. All right, anything else? Let's pick up where we left off then, which was not in Unit 2, it was still Part 1. Do a quick review. Yep.
My Android Studio won't open up my last file that we created.
Did you save it on your desktop or someplace?
Yeah, I did.
Here's what happened to Andy. He opened up his project and it looked basically like this. So there's no files. Well, this is like open up a Visual Studio project and it comes up blank. Doesn't mean there's nothing there. Simply means that you haven't told Android Studio now why his didn't come up like mine did in the code with the emulator showing and all that stuff. I don't know. But when this comes up, check the project. It's probably the app is in there and this is what it looked like on his. And so you just expand the app and then expand the resources and go to the layout. And this is the actual activity itself. That's that visual screen. So if you don't see that when it comes up, go to App, Resources, Layout, Activity. And then this comes up and the code comes up and so on. And then we were working in Java. We don't use the test. Here's the sample code. Double click on that. And then the main activity has got the code in it that we're playing with. Just takes a little getting used to. We'll take the time to get there. Okay, a little review from last time. I changed the code slightly, but what we did is created a custom piece of code. But first of all, I'm going to go back to my main view. We put a label on here, actually a text view is what they're called. I'll try to use the right terms here. Put a text view on there, and then we hit the edges and stretched it so that it filled the entire screen. We gave it a name. Why am I in preview mode here? Let's close this one. Oh, this is in text view. If you want to modify this, you have to be in design view. It's just very similar to Visual Studio, right? Design view, you get to see what it looks like and you can play with it and make it bigger, change its properties. We gave this item an ID, very important. So here's its ID, that's its name. If necessary, we can change the gravity that makes the text gravitate to the top left. We put some sample text in there. Okay. And then we switch back to text view. What's nice about this IDE is it lets you see the text and this at the same time if you want to. Right? Particularly if you're looking in the XML. This is when we created this text view, this code was created for us automatically. Just like in Visual Studio, when you drop a label or a text box onto a form behind the scenes, Visual Studio creates the object and its properties that control where it sits on the screen, and how big it is, and what text it has in it, what color it is, etc. All of that's in here. And if you look closely, it has an ID. It has initial text. It has a gravity toward the top. Has a bunch of other stuff that we may or may not understand. We will later. But all that was done for us automatically. We get to see both. Normally, at least for right now, I'm going to play around in design view. Then in code, we went to the Java main activity. That's our main function. On create, this is the main activity. It's the one that's going to launch automatically when we say run. The main activity does all of that. Inside there is a kind of a form load method called on create that does a bunch of stuff that we're not going to mess with. These two lines. This basically says, okay, this is an activity. It's an app compatible activity. Run some code that's associated with activities. Then we're going to use activity main as a screen that we're going to display. Activity main. Notice there's our friend R again. And then finally we said, call our own method, the one that we wrote, called run code. So we wrote our own method, public void. It's not going to return anything. We're just using it for playing around here. First thing we did is linked this pointer, TV is a pointer, to that text view that's on the form. Here's how you link it. You find a view. Just like in Visual Studio, everything's an object. Everything in Visual Studio is an object. Everything in Android is a view. Stuff you put on the form is a view. It all inherits, it all inherits from a basic class called view. Something very, very generic. And we make it more and more detailed. So this says, find me a view. There must be a view with this name. It's in the R class. It has an ID called TV results. Find it for me. Make this point to it. Then we can do things like set its text, change its color, append text to the end of it. We appended this text, the \n starts a new line so that our label, our text view can display lots of lines. That's why these are going down the page instead of across. Talked about defining constants. Keyword is final. Could declare that outside. All right, somebody asked, shouldn't I declare my constants up at the top? That's a possibility. The only reason we're defining constants here is we don't really have an input mechanism. And Jess came from the Rapids class there. They were using Eclipse to create Java projects. Well, there you have a method to actually get information from the keyboard. But we're testing this on a mobile device. That keyboard is not, no. So that's what we're using these constants for the most part, is just to pretend like the user typed in an age of 57. Then we can append, we can concatenate, we can do all kinds of stuff, declare a variable, did some math here with quarters, turned it back into an integer, divided by 10. When we divided 88 by 10, we got 8 because it was integer division. And here's our results now. Quick review. All right, we did integer math, we did typecasting. Let's go down to if statements. I'm not going to spend any time here because if statements in Java are identical to C#. So you should be very familiar with them. It's just touch to make sure. There is no end if, no double equal sign to do comparisons. And just like C#, if you put in a single equal sign here, the Android Studio will tell you you don't want to do that. Not equal to, less than, same kind of stuff. Not 2 ampersands, 2 vertical bars. 2 ampersands represent a conjunction called and. If this is true and this is true, or if this is true or this one is true. And we talked, I think we talked briefly last time about short circuits, right? I seem to remember asking you and got pretty decent answers, but not exactly, or am I thinking of a different class? Did we talk about them last time? What the heck am I, oh, you know what it was? I was listening to the recordings. I was listening to last or 2 years ago's recordings when we talked about it. Tell me about short circuit. What does that mean?
If the statement is true, it doesn't read the rest of the code.
Okay, good.
It's a true statement, it just ends because it's true.
On this one, right? No, on this one.
on the or.
If you have two conditions, if this is true or this is true, if the first one's true, we don't have to process the second one. And Java, C#, both automatically short circuit, basically meaning it's true. It analyzes the whole statement and says it's an or. If this is true, good enough. We know the answer is true. The author of the C# book suggests that you put the condition most likely to be true, if there is such a thing, first, because it'll speed up your code by gazillions of a second. Because as soon as it finds this is true, it doesn't do the rest of it, and that'll save a couple billions here and there. If that's inside a billion item loop, then there, you saved a second. Good job. With an AND operator, if the first condition is false, it'll stop processing. Put the condition, if you're doing a this and this is true, put the condition most likely to be true at the beginning, or pardon me, the one most likely to be false at the beginning to speed up your code by a smidge. You can control that. If you know that this is usually true, you can control that. It happens automatically. It is so rare that you want to not short circuit. But I'm not even going to bother talking about it here. I'll leave that for Brent because he's going to talk about it in web data management. No, he'll talk about it in JavaScript validation later on. All right, here's what the if statement looks like. If parentheses around a condition. Again, this condition can have 3, 4 parts with ands and ors and all that stuff stuck inside. If this condition is true, you execute the statements in this block of code between the curly brackets. And you can have as many statements here as you want. If this condition is false, it skips these statements and automatically executes this block of code if there's an else. There doesn't have to be one. What if there's no else? Then it just doesn't do this and it goes merrily on its way. The program continues. You don't put any semicolons in here. If you do, it screws things up. If you put a semicolon here, it thinks that semicolon is actually the end of the true part. And then it gets these curly brackets and then it sees an else later. So wait, there's no if. It's really amazing. You put a semicolon right there. You might get a syntax here. Let's try one here real quick. Okay, going into the code if you want to follow along here at the end. I'm going to say something like if the age that was our variable is greater than or equal to 57, then we can TV append. Else. And just do a quick test. In my case, my age is exactly 57, so this should display you're kind of old. Please. There we go. Quick test, change the age to 56. How do you know the if statement works if you only test half of it? I have to test both sides. Now, my premise was if I put a semicolon here, get an error message on my else. And what does it say? Else without an if. What are you talking about? It's right there. And if you had this big convoluted condition in here that was half a line long, you might sneak that semicolon in here. If you're still using the default font size of 4 or whatever it is in here, you could sneak that semicolon in there and not see it. And you're going, what are you talking about? There's your if right there. Well, not really. This is what you're really telling C# or Java, excuse me. If the age is greater than 57, do nothing. That's what that says. Where's the else? There isn't one. Then come down to this block of code. Why is there a block of code here? There can be. It's kind of goofy. We wouldn't normally do it. And then we hit this else and it's going, where's my if? This if ended right there. The whole thing. The if, the else, all of it ended right there. If this semicolon is not immediately followed by an else, there isn't an else. So this else is out there all by itself, all because of one little semicolon. Remember also from C# that I taught you that this is legal. And that I also like to put an end if here as a comment just to make sure that I designate where I think the if ends. When they get lots and lots of them and they stack on top of each other, it's good to put comments at the end of your ifs and elses so that you know where you think they end. And then when you ask me for help, I can come take a look and say, you said the if ends here. That's not where it ends. It ends up here. There's a semicolon, or there's no curly brackets, or there's whatever. If you document them, it can make your debugging a little easier. This is legal. Where's the curly bracket? Curly brackets are only required when you have a block of code with more than one line in them. More accurately, more than one command. By the way, in Java's mind, this is one command. It's as if I wrote that whole thing out on one big old long line. If your age is greater than or equal to 57, do this, else do that. One big long line. The if command from beginning to end is one statement. So if I was burying that in a loop, I wouldn't have to put curly brackets around it. But most people would tell you that's not a good idea. It's legal, but this is better so that if you enhance the code later, you don't have to remember to put the curly brackets in. If it works, it's indented properly, I'm not going to worry about it. Even if you're not consistent, it'll make me cringe, but I'm not going to worry about it if your code works. I will probably write all kinds of red stuff. I expect this semester in this class that in your evaluation sheets, there'll be all kinds of red stuff that you don't have to fix. Except it's making me barf. Fix it. It's not indented. Well, indentation, I'm probably going to mark wrong. That's still important. If you don't indent right, maintenance programmer's in for a nightmare. But if I put curly brackets on my if and then not on my else, I would cringe and stop grading yours and grade somebody else's instead for a while till I got over it. And that's legal. It's just not consistent. And Karen, you've been reading a lot of code yet? Consistency help? Definitely. Indentation, critical. You'll get used to seeing this indentation. You got a whole nother year of indentation coming at you. Between this class and your web programming class, the JavaScript, even your HTML needs to be indented right so that you can find your way through it, right? And then PHP. Even SQL can be indented so that you can read it. You'll get used to what it looks like. Try to be consistent. Will help everybody. Forgot my \n, so I'm going to add them in here real quick. This ought to look fairly familiar. This is all your validation code that you did, programming logic intermediate, right? Make sure that the data's in range. We used constants here. I could declare them, but I'm just demonstrating and reminding you of range check. What does it look like? The alternative to this, and I will comment this out after I'm done, is to check to see if it's bad. If the age is less than 10 or the age is greater than 127, then it's bad. It's amazing how often I'll see this. That will never be true. Give me a number that's less than 10 and greater than 127. No such number. This will never be true. It's syntactically correct, but it will never be true. If it's too low or too high, it's bad. If it's just right, if it's in between those, it's okay. So this is the reverse version of the one underneath. Could use either one, but they're an example of a compound condition. Go back to my notes, see what other fun stuff there is here. End if I didn't put them in. I said I use them for clarity, and then I forgot to put them in. So I would put an end if here. Yes, I put them under curly brackets. Later on, you'll have ifs inside of elses, inside of for loops, inside of methods. What's the end for what, where? You got all these curly brackets. You can't imagine how many times people called me over and said, I'm getting an error in this curly bracket. It's because you're missing one. Which one? If you label them, it could be a little easier to find. But that's not required. Curly brackets are optional. How do we indent these? This is a mistake in my PDF file. For some reason it took my indentation out. Those should be indented. And here and here and here, I should redo those. This, else if, takes advantage of the fact that the curly brackets are optional. And that an if statement, everything from here to there, here to there, is one statement. So this else has one statement in it. If you don't quite understand what I meant by that, rewind the recording 5 times and listen to it over and over and over again. But it doesn't matter. Java, just like C#, basically has an else if. Else if means else if the above is false, ask this question. Doesn't really have one, but it looks like it. Else if, ask this question, this else belongs to that if. Those occasionally come in handy. Less and less so. They used to come in handy primarily for string processing. In the past, switch statements you couldn't process a switch statement with strings. Didn't work. Today, all languages that you're using, I'm pretty sure, allow you to have switch statements with strings inside. And so you don't need the else ifs anywhere near as much as you used to. Case statements is a generic term for switch. Java uses a switch statement, just like all the other languages do, all the other curly brackets do. And here's the example. And this is a great example. I wonder if I can steal that. This should be tricky. So far, so bad. I'm also control-C'ing stuff here, and it doesn't work very well. There we go. Didn't indent very well. A few extra lines here and there. So here's a switch statement. You can put the curly bracket here or up there. How do you know? You don't. Maybe your new employer will tell you how to do that. At the very least, be consistent. Oh, come on. That curly bracket belongs, so go away. Sorry. Okay, here's my switch statement. Case 2 doesn't like the case because there's no such thing as month yet. So I'm going to define an integer here, and I'm going to find a different kind of an integer. Now everything's cool. What's the difference between this integer and the little integer? Little int. This one's a class. The little int, the little double, the ones that are all lowercase, are called primitives. They are built into the language. They have been there since C, which is the dawn of time. But in the newer languages, we need numbers that behave like a class. This is the class integer. It has methods inside it. It stores a number, and what's cool about the latest versions of the integer class is you can assign a number 3 to it, and it figures out that the class has got members in it, right? Where's that going? Where's the 3 going? I don't know, inside there someplace where it says my value or whatever. It deals with it. We don't have to worry about it. So you can use a capital integer instead of an int, and for our purposes, they're pretty much interchangeable. I can use this variable month inside a switch statement, even though it's an object. It's really cool. Someday I'm going to take a look at the code that's hiding around in there, see if I can understand it. That makes the integer class work. So you can use them interchangeably. When we get to array lists, if we get that far today, when we get to array lists, you'll see why we would want to do that. Because array lists, you cannot add integers, primitives, to an array list. It can't handle them. So if you want to have an array list, a list of integers, you have to use the integer class. And in this version of Java, at least, the integer class and its friend int are almost interchangeable, and this actually has a whole lot more power, so why use the little one? It's a good question. What would happen to my code if I went through all of these and say, nah, you know what? I don't know if I can do a final one. Oh, that's interesting. Can I do that? Ain't complaining. Let's see if it runs. Did it say no, or did I make it stop? There it goes. Everything still works. So they're interchangeable. There's also a capital D double. We've already seen that the only thing there is in Java is a capital S string. That's all there is. So you may use either one. I would recommend start getting in the habit of using these, because we will be using array lists frequently. We'll be using lists, and we want to put numbers in those. You're going to have to use the classes. And other than that, they're interchangeable. All my math, all my validation, everything still works. Here I'm multiplying an integer class times a double primitive. That's definitely a primitive because it's a literal. Works fine. And then I converted it to an int. I wonder if I can convert it to an integer. Integer. That I can't do. That's interesting. But this was okay. And what's interesting here is notice that days is an integer, and I'm sticking an int into it. So what I did right here is stick an int into an integer. Works. They're almost interchangeable. I say almost because that didn't work. All right, quickly, let's analyze this code here for my switch. Take a look at the month. This is a pretty classic piece of code. Tell me how many days are in a month, given the month number. If the case is 2, the answer is 28, break. For each value that you want to analyze, you must list them as a case. So case 2, colon. That's the syntax. There's no curly brackets required here. You can put them in, but they're not required. The break is required, and it says, okay, when you hit 28, jump up. Skip the rest of the cases. If it's not 2, then it checks the next case. Is it 4? If it is, do this. There's nothing there. Yes, but there's also no break. So it does this. There's nothing there. It goes this. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. Oh, look, here's some code. Process, break. So 4, 6, 9, and 11, any one of those will say days equals 30. A switch statement also gives you kind of like an else. Some languages actually use else. In C#, in Java, the keyword is default. If it's none of these, must be a 31-day month, move on. Notice the break here is not required, though many programmers will put it in. Just so if they decide to move stuff around, think that it's okay to put the default at the top. Change the value of days in here, which may not be great, but demo. And now right now, it said month equals 3. So is it 2? No. 4, 6, 9, 11? No. Should get a 31. Again, if I'm going to test this, I should test it at least 3 times. Maybe 12, because there are 12 months. And I should make sure that each month gives me the appropriate number. Why did I pick 4, 6, 9, and 11 here? Why didn't I do the 1, 3, 5, 8, whatever the rest of them are? Because there's only 4 of these and there's like 7 of the rest of them. It's a whole lot more typing. Couldn't I have done 1, 3, 5? Yeah, I could have. And said days equals 30. I can do that. What you cannot do in a switch statement in Java is do a less than kind of thing. This, by the way, is also legal where it's all on one line because it's nice and short. But what you cannot do is use a less than sign. So you cannot say case month less than 2 or less than 40. Does not work. You must list every single value that you want analyzed or cover it in a default. Other languages are a little more powerful in their switch statements and their case statements, and they can say case less than 2. And any month less than 2 will match. Case less than 6. Case greater than 7. Java does not have the flexibility to do that. In Java, you must list the case followed by a discrete value. You can use a string. Let's do that and then we'll call it good here. I'm going to copy this code. And I'm going to create a string. I won't be able to call it month, so I'll have to rename it. I'll just put an str at the beginning of it. Month equals March. All right, so I'm just doing the same thing, but this time I'm using a string. I'm going to take a look at the str month. And here I'll put February. And test that one. Said March, so I should get this days as 31 twice. Yep. What if I did this? How many days?
31.
Why? Louder?
Is it June?
Because the June's not capitalized. This does not match that. Strings are case sensitive, always, always, always. How long will it take you to find that one debugging? A little while. All right, you'd figure it out. You go, what do you mean 31? It should be, oh, then maybe you'd see it. Now I should get 30. So you can use strings. I want to say there's one language left yet where you can't use strings in a switch statement. I forget which one it is. Questions about if statements? All right, let's take 10, pause the recording, and we'll come back and start talking about loops.